Welcome to Roll for Insight, the D&D podcast where we dive into the game, the lore, and the internet's favorite arguments. Grab your dice and your character sheet, and let's roll for insight. Hello, welcome to Roll for Insight. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the origin feat Tavern Brawler out of the 2024 D&D Player's Handbook. So, Tavern Brawler is an origin feat that is available at character creation by choosing the Sailor origin, or by choosing it as a feat when you level up. Also, if you're using a background or origin from an older D&D version that doesn't provide a feat, you can take this as an origin feat of your choice. So, in this episode, we'll be covering the description of the origin feat from the Player's Handbook, we'll review some gameplay uses, plus some benefits and limitations of the feat, we'll pull some ideas and opinions from the internet, and last, we'll end with some fun fact information about the feat. Okay, so first topic, origin feat Tavern Brawler. It's available to the Sailor origin. You gain the following benefits. Enhanced Unarmed Strike. When you hit with your unarmed strike and deal damage, you can deal bludgeoning damage equal to 1d4 plus your strength modifier instead of the normal damage of an unarmed strike. Damage rerolls. Whenever you roll a damage die for your unarmed strike, you can reroll the damage if it rolls a 1 and you must use the new roll. Improvised weaponry. You have proficiency with improvised weapons. And push. When you hit a creature with an unarmed strike as part of the attack action on your turn, you can deal damage to the target and also push it 5 feet away from you. You can use this benefit only once per turn. Now, a few clarifications on the description. Tavern Brawler is very combat forward, but there are a few key mechanical clarifications that really define how strong this feat actually is. Now, with the Enhanced Unarmed Strike, normally an unarmed strike deals 1 plus your strength modifier damage. Now, with Tavern Brawler, you can deal 1d4 plus your strength modifier. And that means that your ceiling damage goes up, and your average damage increases meaningfully, especially at low levels. However, this only applies to unarmed strikes, and it does not improve your weapon attacks. So unfortunately, it also doesn't scale automatically beyond the 1d4 unless you have other class features. So, you'll see this be a lot more impactful at low levels before things like magical weapons and multiple damage dice start coming into play. Now, looking at the damage rerolls for unarmed strikes only. Whenever you roll a damage die for your unarmed strike, if you roll a 1, you reroll it, and you must use the new roll. So this stacks really nicely with the improved 1d4 damage die. Now, it is important to note this only affects the weapon die. It does not affect any ability modifiers or any extra damage dice from other sources for that weapon attack. So it's very similar in spirit to Savage Attacker, where it improves consistency in damage, but not necessarily your burst damage. Now, the improved weapon proficiency. This is where Tavern Brawler can be really fun with a role-playing side of things. Because you are proficient with improvised weapons, it means you can add your proficiency bonus when you make attacks with things like chairs and bottles, beer tankards, table legs, rocks, anything that can reasonably be used like a weapon. Normally, improvised weapons deal 1d4 damage unless the DM rules otherwise. And then with Tavern Brawler, you don't suffer from any lack of proficiency penalties. So this is another skill that is extremely table dependent, but it means that you're going to dominate in the classic D&D bar fights. Now the last mechanic, push. This one gives you quite a nice amount of battlefield control, and that can always be useful. So when you hit a creature with an unarmed strike as part of the attack action, you deal damage and you can push it 5 feet away once per turn. And a few subtle but very important rules to go along with this. The shove does not require a contested check. It does not require size conditions. It simply triggers on hit. So you're not adding any action economy to use this ability, meaning it doesn't require a bonus action or a reaction to use it. So this gives Tavern Brawler some minor battlefield control, which is often overlooked. You might be thinking 5 feet isn't very much, but 5 feet can have a huge impact on battlefield control when it's the difference between an enemy getting an opportunity attack on you or not, or pushing someone off a ledge. Now, looking at some gameplay uses, Tavern Brawler is primarily a combat feat, but it plays very differently depending on your build. So looking at combat uses at low levels, you become a reliable unarmed combatant. and it's less dependent on weapons. So this is all very situational, but if the situation calls for it, then it's going to be very useful. And push opens up a lot of options for things like breaking grapples and knocking enemies off ledges and creating space on the battlefield. You can also look at forcing enemies out of range on other characters or doing things like breaking line of sight. Push also makes you look at your environment, especially if you're in a tight spot when you're close to hazards or you're trying to control certain choke points. And it can also functionally let you disengage without spending your action on it if the enemy only has a 5-foot reach. Now, there are a few types of characters who benefit the most from this one, and you'll probably find that Tavern Brawler works best for the strength-based characters, since the improvised weapons and unarmed strikes use strength, and then the fighter and barbarian types, who are the typical strength-based and frontline fighters. And then characters who also find themselves in weapon-restricted environments, so whether that's due to environmental conditions or if it's campaign-specific. And then also things like the gritty survival campaigns, or if your DM likes to use the disarm feature a lot. So it definitely overlaps with a lot of ideas around the monk class, but monks already have an upgrade to their unarmed strikes, so this feat is not 100% necessary to take, but you can still get a lot of mileage out of it as a monk. Now, looking at the improvised weapon scenarios, this feat is a lot of fun when you're in a really cinematic type campaign and you like doing cool things. So some situations, like if you find yourself disarmed by the enemy constantly, or if you like to get into the classic bar fight. Some tables also find their party imprisoned more than they probably should be, but the Tavern Brawler feat is made for the people who like using their environment in a fight. So for some tables, again, this sort of stuff might never come up. Now, looking at benefits, there is a lot of thematic-based benefits to this feat, but it also does give reliable early game damage with the improved rolls, and the battlefield control will probably stay useful throughout the campaign since it doesn't use action economy. Limitations, again, it comes down to expectation setting, because the damage die is only 1d4, so we're not talking a huge upgrade. Plus, it doesn't scale automatically. And since it's available at character creation, it's also competing with feats that increase damage more dramatically, like Savage Attacker. You're going to find some relative loss of value too with this feat if magical weapons start appearing early and often, or if you're playing with lots of other damage riders. And if you don't find yourself in the chaotic, scrappy environments very often, again, you might not use all these features. Okay, now looking at discussion board topics from the internet, it's not surprising, but Tavern Brawler sparks a lot of strong reactions from people here. There's a common criticism that this is a flavor feat, it's not a power feat, that it's fun and not optimal, and it's weaker than heavy weapons or damage feats. And if you're crunching the numbers, that is often true, but again, that doesn't make it useless. A lot of the arguments in favor is that the push function is a lot stronger than it looks, because the automatic 5-foot push on hit is very powerful. It can do things like break grapples and disrupt enemy positioning and force movement into hazards, and that's where experienced players often rate it a lot higher than expected. Something else that comes up pretty often is that improvised weapons are very DM dependent, and that's a very valid point, like many origin feats. It depends on the table that you're at. So if your DM doesn't really describe environmental objects or doesn't support the creative combat side of things, then that part of this feat might never really have a chance to stand out and shine. Because Tavern Brawler needs a group that wants to embrace the cinematic, the cool moments of D&D. Now, to wrap things up, the fun fact information here for the Tavern Brawler feat. Tavern Brawler really represents one of the most iconic styles of fighting in history, the Tavern Brawl. So this style of fighting has some of the most classic moves, like the tankard smash across someone's face as an opening move, of course. And how about the chair break across the back? You can grab the nearest loot and break the perfectly good instrument into pieces, and you can keep it going with a toss off the balcony or through the window, and end it with the bartender who turns out to be a level 20 retired adventurer who has to intervene. So this feat lets anyone open up the option to play out that fantasy of the Tavern Brawler. Now, where it leaves us on the origin feat here, it's not specifically the highest damage feat, and it doesn't scale much into late game, but it is a great pick to give you a lot of great role-playing options, and at the same time add some real battlefield control and a decent damage boost in the right situations. Well, that's it for this session of Roll for Insight. Thanks for listening, and thank you to all our supporters on patreon.com/rollforinsightpodcast. And we will see you next time.